The big question. The one that permeates in the minds of millions of tourists that fly into Las Vegas and see the endless desert surrounding the bright neon lights is, why here? Well, despite the harsh soil and sagebrush and triple-digit summers and having less rain than any other major city in the country, Las Vegas started from a farm. The two basics that humans need for survival is food and water. So the story of farming in Las Vegas and the water that was required to do it is the origin story. Despite popular belief, the location of Las Vegas isn't just random. Casinos didn't just pop out of the ground one day. But water, on the other hand, did.
Nevada, to the gold rushes of '49, was a state of extreme horror. It was a hot-tailed piece of an unearthly blot on the surface of the universe, and where none, by choice, should ever tread. But as the calendar has rolled off the years, it has come to mean many things to many people.
Howdy, and welcome. I'm your host, Alex. This episode, Sin City, the humble farming town in the middle of the desert. This is my show. This is what happened in Vegas. Let's go back. Let's go really, really far back in time. Hop in the DeLorean with me, or the magic school bus, or that phone booth that Bill and Ted used. 1.21 gigawatts. Let's go. Whew. All right, we're here. About 350 years before the birth of Christ, in what will later be called the Las Vegas Valley. There's springs dotting the landscape of the Mojave. These springs, along with sporadic rainfall, flow into the Las Vegas Wash, a stream that flows from here to the Colorado River, when there's enough water for it to flow. If you're picturing raging rapids, go ahead and scratch that. This is a shallow, puny stream. But it is a stream. And in the springtime, when the snow melts off the mountains that surround the valley, the wash will flood onto its shallow banks. Meanwhile, someone is planting seeds along the banks of this wash, and in time, these seeds will grow to be corn. This corn will leave behind traces, and about 2,000 years from now, archaeologists will discover it, and it will become the earliest evidence we have of farming in the Las Vegas Valley. I'm just trying to visualize. Is it like an imprint of a corn cob, or is it literally just an old corn cob?
It's an old corn cob. So we're dry enough here that sometimes we get whole cobs that aren't even burned if they're in dry caves because they'll preserve.
Karen Hari is a professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. She specializes in the prehistory of Southern Nevada, so she's very familiar with old corn.
And so, yeah, a lot of times we find them. Sometimes you'll see them with your naked eye. More oftenly, we gather up ashy dirt that looks like they threw out their hearth, their fire pit where they were cooking, and we throw it in water. It's called flotation, and the seeds float to the top. We skim those off, and we send them to an expert who knows how to identify the seeds.
Discoveries like this corn gave archaeologists a glimpse into what the life of an ancient farmer was like.
The farmers in the city of Las Vegas, they were either along those rivers or those washes, like the Las Vegas Wash, that would overflow its banks seasonally, and they could farm. Those farmers probably were not heavily reliant on farming.
These ancient farmers adopted a culture to suit the environment and were living nomadically between Las Vegas in the cooler months and surrounding areas of high elevation in the warmer months. Their method of getting food wasn't completely dependent on farming.
In other words, they didn't know each year if they could get a crop or not, because we are in an arid environment. And, obviously away from the water, they wouldn't be able to farm. So they were probably farming, and if crops came in, great. And if not, they were probably supplementing that pretty heavily with wild resources.
I think that
people who aren't familiar with this area think, whether they visit or they've just heard about Las Vegas or seen it in movies, is that there's a barren wasteland and then there's just this city in the middle of nowhere. And there's no reason that people came here except for maybe there was a lot of land.
You're not alone in thinking that most people look at this as a barren wasteland. Even the early archaeologists and the first archaeologists to work here in the 1925, and nobody believed them that there were farming communities here. They said, there's not farming communities. You're too far west. And they were wrong. We are here. We've got some wonderful archaeological sites here.
Back in the 1800s, explorers didn't think Las Vegas would ever amount to anything. Here are some quotes from people who turned out to be very wrong.
Positively un-American in its lack of productive potential. Jedediah Smith, 1827.
An unmapped, strange land. An Old Testament desert placed in a great basin. John C. Fremont, 1840. To the farmer who comes to this thirsty land beneath rainy skies, Nevada seems one vast desert, all sage and sand, hopelessly irredeemable, now and forever. John Mayer, 1860.
What these folks omitted from their opinion of the Las Vegas Valley, either willingly or ignorantly, is that a tribe of Native Americans called the Southern Paiute had farmed and hunted on these lands for centuries. That peaceful living would be violently interrupted by incoming settlers. The Spanish trade route from New Mexico to Los Angeles would bring in more and more people into the valley, and upon closer inspection, foreigners realized the potential. A traveler named Rafael Rivera observed the springs and local flora and called the area Las Vegas, which translates to the meadows. As the years went by, the interruption of the Southern Paiute way of life grew more and more severe. And in 1855, the first non-Paiute farm was created, what we now call the Old Mormon Fort. The president of the Church of Latter-day Saints, Brigham Young, wanted to colonize the West and sent missionaries to the area to convert the local Paiute and establish a way station between Salt Lake City and Southern California. These missionaries established a successful farm and were able to grow a variety of fruits, vegetables, and cotton through irrigation from the Las Vegas Creek. The settlement would last for a decade, but issues such as loss of morale, farming in 110-degree heat is pretty hard, and uneasy relationship with the Paiute whose land they were trespassing on caused them to abandon the fort. The at least partial success of the farming at the fort established that it could be done. After the missionaries left Las Vegas, it was relatively quiet for a while, but the Homestead Act would change all of that. In 1862, the U.S. government wanted to encourage people to migrate west, and the act said if you traveled west, found a spot that was unclaimed, and you built a house and tilled the soil for 5 years and made improvements, well, for the low price of $10, in the eyes of Uncle Sam, that is now your land. This westward expansion ended up being bloody and brutal to the Native Americans who lived in the West, and would shape the country into the lines in the map we see today. Slowly, miner camps in the late 1800s would pop up, and guess what those miners needed? Food. So along with them, farms would pop up. This community would continue to grow throughout the years. The first two major farms in Las Vegas that were set up were the Keel Ranch, which was set up at the Old Mormon Fort, and the Stewart Ranch, run by Archie and Helen Stewart. These were the Hatfields and McCoys of the era. For whatever reason, they hated each other. This hatred kept boiling until one day, Archie Stewart got word that some on the Keel Ranch were spreading gossip about his wife. Archie didn't like that. He grabbed his gun, rode to the Keel Ranch to confront them, and was shot dead. Like straight out of an old Western. And if this part of Las Vegas history was a movie, it would be the origin story of Helen Stewart, known accordingly as the First Lady of Las Vegas. Helen Stewart never even wanted to move to Las Vegas. At this point, Vegas was far from glitz and glamour. It was a dusty spot in the road. And after her husband died, she was left with 4 kids, another on the way, and a ranch to run with no previous experience. She even had to have the doors taken off the house for the wood to build her husband's casket. Helen Stewart not only learned to run the ranch successfully, she thrived. She ended up becoming the town's first postmaster, helped form the school district, and at one point was the largest landowner in the county. Many towns in the West were built from a ranch, and Las Vegas is no different. When Helen Stewart sold the ranch to the railroad in 1903, it turned Las Vegas into a real town. The railroad, whose trains ran on steam engines, needed water to keep running. And they chose Las Vegas due to its abundance of water and its location halfway between Salt Lake and Los Angeles. This way station would immediately become the focal point of the town's economy. To explain how there got to be so much water beneath Las Vegas and how people eventually got to it, let's take a moment and go back to geology class. I myself have spent some time in summer school, but still didn't retain information like how groundwater works or what an artesian well is. Not to bore you to death, I'll keep this short. Yes, Las Vegas is in a desert, and the desert is dry, but it is in a valley surrounded by mountains. And while these mountain ranges sometimes block rain clouds from coming in, they themselves get that rain or snow. Some of this moisture seeps into the ground and travels underground, down the mountain and into the valley, and settles there in aquifers. These aquifers are layered by impermeable rock, which means the water cannot escape. That is, unless you drilled underground and broke this rock layer. At that point, the pressure would cause the water to come out of the ground without you even needing to pump it. This is called an artesian well. The artesian well would make it possible for people in the Las Vegas Valley to farm with consistency. In 1905, the same year the railroad was built through town, the Las Vegas Artesian Water Syndicate was formed. This group, although they sound like a team of supervillains with the sole purpose of destroying the Batman, was a co-op of landowners and business people in Las Vegas who banded together to find out how much water was beneath Las Vegas and how to get to it. After hiring experts to bore into the ground and search for water, Las Vegans realized they were sitting on a whole lot of water. When farmers started drilling these artesian wells, the image of Las Vegas as a barren waste started to vanish for those in the know. Some were claiming that water was cheaper to develop here than other places like Colorado, Oregon, or Nebraska, and whenever someone hit water on their farm, the land value would increase. It was popping off. The expectation for agriculture in Las Vegas at this point was sky high. Some were referring to the town as a future garden city and claimed in terms of agriculture, it could become the new Southern California. Ads were run about semi-tropical lands in southern Nevada. Las Vegas was blooming, but the work to reach the dream of owning and operating your own farm was filled with backbreaking labor and patience. All right, let's say it's 1912 and you want to move to Las Vegas and start a farm. To illustrate what this was like, let's look at a guy who did this. Philip Steinman. Not famous, just a guy. A guy who wanted to start his own farm. Following the guidelines of the Homestead Act, he surveyed a 160-acre plot of land and made a claim for it. He started clearing the brush and mesquite trees and building a cabin from that mesquite. Looking good so far. At this point, he needed water, so he paid for the drilling of an artesian well, and this exhausted his funds. Because of this, he would have to work side jobs like construction on other people's farms, prospecting, and then in his off hours, then he could finally work on his own farm, all the while sleeping in a tent on his land until he finished building his cabin. He also had to deal with cattle rustlers who were pissed at homesteaders for moving into the area, blocking the open range. They stole canned goods from him, shot at his horses, dismantled his tent, and cut through the wire surrounding his property. On top of all of this, he was ordered to serve jury duty during a harvest season, and due to that, his crops died. But he persisted, and eventually had a successful ranch. By 1914, his soil was so fertile, he was able to produce 400 crates of cantaloupes, 4 tons of potatoes, along with parsnips, cotton, tobacco, and he raised pigs and chickens. Now, as you can see, there's room for error in that scenario. Not everyone was successful. As the years went by, farming in Las Vegas expanded, and organizations like the Clark County Farm Bureau were formed with a focus on research and education to help farmers in dealing with tough soil and preventing livestock diseases. Agriculture in Las Vegas started hitting its peak around World War I. We needed food to win the war, and the federal government signed the Smith-Lever Act, which meant to modernize ag with progressive farming methods. Educational train cars would stop in town and teach farmers in these methods and inform them on what there were shortages of. Las Vegans did their part and expanded to grow to try to help the war effort.
It is the hope of American agriculture. Though this nation must fight to keep invaders from its own shores, its farmlands are abundant, greater even than the areas of Norway, Sweden.
This ended up not working out for them because after the war was over, demand fell hard. In the 1920s, the railroad was sold to Union Pacific, which moved their repair station from Las Vegas to Caliente, Nevada. Las Vegas needed something new to revolve its economy around, and agriculture was already there. The town tried finding a cash crop, and one they experimented with was cotton. This ended up failing due to the importation of cotton from other countries for cheaper prices. They experimented with other crops, but nothing really seemed to stick. And by the 1930s, it was clear that having agriculture as the focal point of the economy just wasn't going to happen. Around this time, plans for the Hoover Dam were being drawn up, and there was hope for some that the dam could help save agriculture in Las Vegas. So, why didn't it? I mean, that's a lot of water that could go to making southern Nevada bloom. I talked to someone who had just finished a book on water history in Las Vegas, and as he explains, the numbers just didn't add up.
There was an understanding, a mathematically based understanding, that ag just wasn't going to work. My name is Christian Harrison. I am the author of the upcoming book, All the Water the Law Allows, Las Vegas and Colorado River Politics. And I have been studying water for the better part of 15 years now.
The Hoover Dam being built caused a political fight between the surrounding states on who had rights to the water. And Nevada was a small player in this scenario. So the state government just focused on getting Nevada to be where the dam would be built and getting the power that it would generate.
So the primary concern was, let's get that dam built on Nevada soil. That gives us jobs. Let's really focus on getting electricity here and downgrade the importance of the water because they just didn't see that they could use it.
What we have to remember is that negotiations are being done at a state level, and the focus at the state level was mining.
It was a mining state, and so they thought we could use the power. You would never in a million years think, oh yeah, we got to get all the water here so that we can have this huge agricultural empire. That's so fantastical thinking.
In terms of Las Vegas's future, this turned out to be the right move. And we can trace the Hoover Dam's construction to what Las Vegas is today.
1929, you have construction beginning in southern Nevada on the Hoover Dam. So immediately, the railroad is expanding, because then it needs to create the spur line out to Boulder City.
Boulder City is a town along the Colorado River, about 20 miles southeast of Las Vegas, built by the federal government to house the workers of the Hoover Dam.
Couple that with legalized gambling in 1931, then at around the same time, you have enough of the dam for that to become a tourist attraction, which it became the number one tourist attraction in the state of Nevada. More people started coming to see the dam being constructed and then ultimately the dam itself. So you have this, synergy between gambling and sightseeing that then becomes an industry unto itself. And as that's picking up, then you have World War II starting in Europe. You have the federal government once again coming here, building the basic magnesium plant to build munitions. You have them building what became Nellis Air Force Base to train thousands of airmen in aerial gunnery. And so that then expands the economy even further. More people come here, they train, they're then aware of Las Vegas. Then you have the invention of reliable air conditioning. Then you have the Cold War, then you have atomic testing, and so on and so forth. And then it builds into this economy that we have now.
Throughout all of this, up until the 1970s, Las Vegas was subsisting on groundwater alone until a pipeline was finally built.
And so you think back, why didn't they get the pipeline earlier? Why wasn't agriculture consulted, in the 1920s? Well, it took 750,000 people to justify the cost of building a pipeline and a pumping station.
So, at the end of the day, in the words of the immortal Wu-Tang Clan, cash rules everything around me.
It's just basic economics. The Imperial Valley of Southern California has, one of the most valuable agricultural economies on the planet. And Las Vegas's economy dwarfs that. And we're only using 300,000 acre feet of water, if that, per year. Whereas the Imperial Valley of California gets the vast majority of that state's Colorado River allocation. So you're just not going to be able to justify appropriating that water for ag in a dry area when you're making so much money doing stuff that just doesn't require as much water.
Although it didn't become the agricultural oasis that some had hoped for, Las Vegas is still an incredible feat of ingenuity, and its creation has defied expectations for over a century.
It would be asking more of somebody to envision a city here in Las Vegas than you or I could envision a city being built on Mars. We understand, we understand rockets are capable of even making it there. That's less of a leap for you and me than it would be to see a gigantic city in the Las Vegas Valley, from the vantage point of a rancher in 1870.
What Happened in Vegas is produced by me, Alex Higgins. I want to thank my guests, Karen Hari and Christian Harrison, for coming to talk with me. And if you want to learn more about Las Vegas's long history with water, check out Christian Harrison's book, All the Water the Law Allows, coming out August 12th. To keep up with the show, go to whathappenedinvegas.com. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.